Hi, welcome back for more rainbow history class. All right, let's just get straight into it and pick up where we left off. Know your icons. Sappho. The word lesbian really just means person from Lesbos, an island just off the coast of Turkey. And on the island of Lesbos, right at the edge of ancient Greece, lived a poet named Sappho. Most historians place their birth somewhere between 640 and 610 BCE. Sappho was a very prolific poet, admired by many in her time, but only fragments of her work remain. Sappho wrote playfully and exquisitely about love and desire between women, hence the use of the word lesbian and sapphic to describe women who experience queer attraction. Despite being written thousands of years ago, the dramatic feelings she describes in her poetry echoes our experiences of love today. These next lines could easily be found in the messaging app of any modern lesbian. I have not I have had not one word from her. Frankly, I wish I were dead. When she left, she wept a great deal. She said to me, "This parting must be endured. Sappho, I go unwillingly." We still can't really say that Sappho herself was a lesbian in the modern sense. All we know about her life is what her poetry indicates, and her poetry isn't necessarily nonfiction. It's probably worth stating the fairly obvious but still mind-bending fact that the ancient Greeks lived a really long time ago. So long ago that there were historians of ancient Greece who lived in ancient Greece. The popular culture idea of ancient Greece, with its sun-bleached stone pillars and wandering philosophers, is actually just one particular time period known as the Classical Age. Sappho lived close to a century before this, in a period called the Archaic Era. Greeks during the Classical Age were enamored with Sappho. They wrote plays about her and documented her, but they were as close to sitting down and getting to know her as today's historians are to hanging out with Thomas Edison. They projected their classical era biases onto her, devaluing her work because she was female, sexualizing her, and perhaps even deliberately distorting her. This all helps explains why so much literature, excuse me, surrounding Sappho is regulated to interpretation. In the many centuries since Sappho wrote of women wearing garlands of violets, every discovery made about her has thrown up more questions. Historians agree that her poetry would have been sung and accompanied by a lyre, a U-shaped stringed instrument. Beyond that, however, there are controversies surrounding almost every aspect of her life, including whether her work was ever performed in public and whether she had a daughter. But there is nothing more hotly debated than her sexuality. It's been suggested that she was a teacher or a leader trusted with educating a collective of young women, and that her desire for these students was expressed in her poetry. The truth is, we'll never know the truth. Arguing about the sexuality of a person who existed so long ago is pretty redundant, but for better or for worse, Sappho has become a symbol. And it's easy to believe poetry that so viscerally describes the desire between women could only have been written by a woman who felt it herself. The case of lesbians against lesbians. Even though the word lesbian originally means person from Lesbos, today the term definitely conjures up images of queer women and people haven't always been happy about that. In 2008, a group of lesbians, as in actual residents of Lesbos, felt their identity was being insulted through its association with gay women. They took the matter to a Greek court, asking it to ban the use of the term lesbian to describe anything other than the island's population. I did not know this at all. Um, that's wild. I didn't know this. Did you know this? I didn't know this. Let's continue on. It was a tough and rather linguistically confusing court battle with lots of lesbians on both sides. To break it down, let's call the residents of Lesbos the plaintiffs and the LGBTQ plus community and their allies the defendants. The plaintiffs argued that the island's residents were the only true lesbians, and, while conceding that gay women could define themselves as they wished, stated that they should not be able to appropriate the identity of the people of Lesbos. The defendants, on the other hand, argued that the case itself was prejudiced and that not all residents of the island were unhappy about this association. The term had given the island a big tourism boost. Lesbo, Lesbos hosts a number of festivals for the LGBTQ plus community, and many queer folk see the trek to Sappho's birthplace as something of a pilgrimage. Ultimately, the plaintiff's attempt failed. The court decided that a single word did not define the identity of those from Lesbos and ruled in favor of the defendants. So now the word lesbian can be used to describe a person from Lesbos, a woman who loves a woman, or in the case of gay women who are from Lesbos, both. The legend of Sappho isn't the only window we have into the changing values of Greek societies. Another poet of the archaic era who had an extraordinary impact on the later Greeks was Homer, the assumed author of the Iliad, an epic 24-book poem telling the story of the Trojan War. The text is placed around the 8th century BCE, but it is believed to have been a spoken poem that was passed down for centuries until Homer finally wrote it down. Although historians generally agree that the Trojan War occurred, the characters are thought to be mythological, and the storyline is all a legend. The Iliad has everything: gods, heroes, that famous Trojan horse, and one of the most famous homo-romantic love stories of all time. Achilles and Patroclus. If you have a decent amount of time to fill, it is absolutely worth losing yourself in the real thing. But if you don't, here is a highly abridged version of the Iliad, or at least the parts relevant to this book. The hero of the story is Achilles, the greatest warrior in the world and the leader of the Greeks, who have been to war with the city of Troy for a decade. Achilles has a huge argument with the general of the Greek army and refuses to fight the war anymore. He even asks his mother to pray to Zeus to help the Trojans. Who knew heroes could be this petty? Enter Patroclus, Achilles' closest, most intimate companion. With Greece on the brink of losing the war against the Trojans, Patroclus tries to convince Achilles to rejoin the fight, but alas, Achilles is having none of it. So Patroclus, the real hero here, goes to fight in the war himself, wearing the armor of his beloved companion. Things are looking better for the Greeks until Hector, Achilles' Trojan counterpart, kills Patroclus, mistaking him for Achilles. When Achilles finds out, he is devastated and furious. He returns to the war to avenge Patroclus, and after a long battle between the two warriors, Achilles kills Hector in the name of his beloved. But Achilles didn't have to live without Patroclus for long because the god Apollo knew about Achilles' one weakness, his heel, of course. Apollo guides a Trojan arrow into Achilles' heel, killing him. This is not the end of the Iliad. We haven't even reached the part about the Trojan horse, but it is the tragic end of Achilles and Patroclus. For millennia, we have been fascinated by the story of Achilles. We even named a tendon after him. But the nature of his love for Patroclus has remained a source of debate. Some 300 years later, in the classical era, Achilles and Patroclus were consistently depicted in art and theater as lovers. Many artifacts show the usually, not unusually, usually arrogant. Let me dismiss that. Usually arrogant Achilles being tender and kind to Patroclus. Upon Patroclus' death, Achilles is depicted naked, lying across his friend's chest, overcome with grief. The writer Aeschylus, known for his contribution to the Greek tragedies, wrote Achilles and Patroclus as tragic lovers, not too dissimilar from the way Shakespeare would describe them 2,000 years later in Troilus and Cressida. Another 400 years pass, and Madeline Miller would write the Song of Achilles, another one of the countless interpretations of this timeless tale that explicitly place Achilles and Patroclus in a same-sex relationship. We're not here to debate their sexuality, and there's no progress to be made by suggesting that two men having a close and loving friendship is proof they are gay. What can be debated, however, is how Homer intended to write them and what interpretations of their story can tell us about queer love in ancient Greece. One other highly influential ancient world figure who argued that Patroclus and Achilles were in a same sex relationship was the philosopher Plato in his monumental work, The Symposium. This text has been a source of validation to same sex attracted and asexual people for thousands of years. The symposium, in the symposium, Plato tells the story of a group of philosophers, comedians, and writers who come together to drink and talk. If you ever compiled the guest list for your own dream dinner party, you're essentially creating your own version of Plato's symposium. It unfolds like a sort of drunken public speaking competition where each guest stands up to deliver a speech on the nature of romantic love and desire, or eros as it was called then. During the evening's final speech, Plato's teacher Socrates describes a ladder of love, beginning with physical love and ascending towards intellectual and ethereal love, which were considered higher forms. This higher love was given the name Platonic after Plato. Today, the term is generally understood to mean love that is not sexual, and perhaps regarded as a lesser form of love. But according to the forefather of Western philosophy, it's the opposite. This definition can be very affirming for people on the asexual spectrum, and it shows us that sex is not a prerequisite for worthy, deep, and valid relationships. Other men at the symposium went even further with their praise of same sex love. It was here that Phaedrus came up with the idea for an army made up entirely of male lovers, suggesting that the army could defeat the entire world. According to Phaedrus, the veriest coward would become an inspired hero, equal to the bravest at such a time. Love would inspire him. The story of ancient Greece's queer answer to Adam and Eve. Another highlight of the symposium is a comic playwright telling a queer creation story that explains why people feel whole when they find love. According to the story, humans were once doubles, being with 4 feet, 4 hands, and 2 sets of genitals. And there were not two sexes, but three. One sex comprising of a man and a man, one of a woman and a woman, and a third of a man and a woman, known as androgynous. The men were born from the sun, women from the earth, and the androgynous from the moon. When humans angered Zeus, he severed them in two, leaving them to go throughout life seeking their other halves. Men and women from the androgynous would find each other and be able to mate. Women from the original woman would not desire men and instead become each other's partners, while men from the original man would continue life together in sexual satisfaction. It may sound absurd, but no more so than the story of Adam and Eve and their forbidden fruit. The story does say that the ideal form of love is a relationship between men, because this is most manly, which makes sense if you equate manliness and goodness like the Greeks did. But what is remarkable in this story is that these attractions are presented as three equally viable combinations. And that tells us a lot about attitudes to same sex relationships at this time. The symposium would make an excellent basis for a reality television show. There was plenty of drama among the drinking and philosophy. Some of the speeches had a secondary agenda of getting another guest into bed. And at one point, someone drunkenly crashes the party to lament that Socrates won't sleep with him. There's even one committed same-sex couple there, Agathon and Persuanas. In his speech, Persuanas argued in favor of same-sex eros, in particular the virtue of love between an older man and a boy around the age when he begins to grow a beard. Relationships between men and boys are a well-documented phenomenon in ancient Greece. The practice, known as pederasty, involving the pairing of an Aristes, an older, more experienced man, with the Eros Menos, a more youthful boy. It was considered a mutually beneficial trade. The younger received tutelage and guidance, while the older received sexual satisfaction. It seems that in some societies, such as Athens, these relationships were primarily confined to the elite social classes, while in Spartan society, they were more of a rite of passage, a mandatory part of the progression into adulthood. The age gap appeared varied according to the unique culture and customs of the different city states. These relationship The Aromenos would be an adolescent boy anywhere between the ages of 12 and 18, where the Aristes was a man who had reached adulthood but was not old. Typically, they would be in their 20s. There are many there were many rules. The Aristes could be punished if they were deemed too keenly pursuing a younger boy, while the Menos had to be careful not to seduce an older man, or he could face penalties for prostitution. It was important that the Menos not be seen to be forced into the relationship, even though it wasn't exactly considered free will. The rules within these relationships were also strictly laid out. The the word ero Aristes roughly translates to lover, while the word eromenos means beloved. The distinction between who was doing the loving and who was being loved was fundamentally important. The older man must be the active participant, while the younger must take the passive role. However, if the younger man continued to take the passive role once he came of age, he would be mocked. There are many, usually quite explicit, artworks of the period depicting these relationships. They can be very comforting. Oh, yeah, very comforting, especially when we view them through the lens of our modern ethics, which would be categorically which would categorically say that such a power dynamic would mean consent is impossible. However, if these relationships would be However, even if these relationships would be unethical and in most places illegal today, it is vital to understand that pe- pederasty is not pedophilia. This is a challenging part of queer history to navigate, as the conflation of homosexuality with pedophilia continues to harm our community, even today. The passion of the cut sleeve. The ancient Greeks have a reputation for same sex liaisons, but all the way over in ancient China, they were just as popular. You've probably experienced the agony of observing your partner, or pet for that matter, sleeping sweetly beside you, their precious head on your arm. That closeness is lovely until you realize you need to pee. The same thing happened to Emperor Ai of the Han Dynasty in China. It's said that Emperor Ai and his lover Dongxing were enjoying a nap together at the palace. When the emperor awoke, he found Dongxing lying asleep on the sleeve of his robe. Rather than risk waking his beloved, he simply cut off his sleeve. Words of this tender act spread throughout the palace, and soon the emperor's courtiers began cutting off their own sleeves as a tribute to the emperor's show of affection. These single sleeve robes became somewhat of a trend, and a euphemism for same sex love was born. Even today in China, same sex love is referred to as the passion of the cut sleeve. That is so cute and so sweet. I love it so much. The emperor certainly wasn't the only Han Dynasty emperor to have a male lover. All 10 emperors were said to have a relationship with other men alongside their wives. The idea of having male and female partners was normalized in China during this period. Sima Qian, a Chinese historian of the early Han Dynasty, who himself lived before Emperor Ai but documented the phenomenon of these male favorites, wrote, "It is not women alone who can use their looks to attract the eyes of the ruler. Others can play that game as well. Many were the men of ancient times who gained favor this way." The emperor's male lovers received exceedingly special treatment, which was entirely accepted, so long as the emperor produced an heir with his empress. But Emperor I did not produce an heir. No surviving records show that he ever was interested in women, and the favoritism shown towards Dong Shan soon became an issue in the palace. Not only was the emperor rewarding him with grain, he also bestowed great gifts and important titles upon his family. As the emperor's health declined with illness, Dongxing's power at the palace rose dramatically until the emperor, on his deathbed, expressed the desire to leave the entire kingdom to Dongxing. This, unfortunately, was too much for the court, who stepped in and forced Dongxing and his wife to kill themselves. There are other tales of same sex desires from ancient China, and they all have this almost parabolic quality to them. Historian Brett Hinich, in his book Passions of the Cut Sleeves, notes that the way the narrative and meaning have been written about these events shows a consciousness around same sex love that has helped subsequent generations of queer people see themselves in history. This story shows us that over 2,000 years ago, people in China were moved by same sex love just as they are today, and that the desire to let sleeping lovers lie is a part of us, wherever and whenever we are. Oh, I love that. I love that. We're going to go ahead and stop there because that's beautiful. That's a beautiful place to stop. So, thank you for reading with me and joining me and spending this time with me to read Rainbow History class. I will see you again later, okay? Be good to yourself, be good to others, drink some water, eat something, be kind to someone, go give them a hug. Hug someone you love a lot, even if it's your pet. And I'll see you next time. And we'll continue on reading, okay? Bye.